Hey everyone, and welcome to this panel on deploying AI agents without losing control. My name is Emil Lassen, and I'm the standard lead for AIUC1. AIUC1 is a standard for AI agent security, safety, and reliability, and my job as the standard lead is really to be the facilitator between two forums. On one side, we've tried to gather the enterprise CISOs and security leaders who are dealing with this adoption challenge right now. On one hand, you want to adopt agents and start utilizing all the cool capabilities that these agents bring. But on the other hand, we keep seeing incidents every week of data being leaked that shouldn't be leaked, safety concerns, security concerns, prompt injection attacks, and jailbreaking attacks that end up being successful. So on one hand, navigating the tightrope between adoption and the risks and capabilities. My job is then taking these risks and concerns to our group of technical contributors and practitioners and figure out how we collectively in the industry develop a standard that can address some of these concerns. And in the conversation today, I have Wayne Duso and Kirshke, two cybersecurity titans in the space who know a lot about this, both from operating in organizations where they are on the frontier deploying agents, but also as ecosystem practitioners working across a lot of different organizations, hearing from the front lines, what are these risks that folks run into right now, and what are some of the solutions we start seeing to ensure that when we deploy these agents, that we do so without losing control. So Chris, Wayne, super excited for the conversation today. And let me just start by asking maybe Wayne, if you want to go first, what AI agents are you deploying in your own organization today, and what are you seeing as some of the key trends in the organizations that you at 1Password?
I have the privileged position of both being, a user of agents and also building products which will help our customers. It's very use agents. So the problems that our customers face and the problems that we face are identical, which is a direct line to understanding. So today, for instance, for deploying across our entire CI/CD pipeline, we are deploying agents for coding. Or building, as I like to refer to it, for testing, for code review, merge requests, and all the way out to deployment to what some folks call SRE. You can generally think of as operations, and creating that end-to-end agentic engineering experience using agents. Now, doing so it requires a great deal of security and making sure that these agents can only act on specific requests and don't hold long-term credentials. So, and this is part of what we're building at 1Password, is enabling our customers to leverage agents in a way which is incredibly safe and never provide plain text secrets into LLMs or into the agents that then can put them into the LLM. So I live on both sides of this line.
And Chris, if I shoot it over to you and your experience at Tuskira, what are some of the agents you see deployed today?
We deploy agents as part of our platform, obviously. We kind of look at it more from how it would actually move from threat to verdict. We're always evaluating, always looking at threat intelligence. There's a need that's changing there. So we're looking at various agents that are handling the threat intelligence feeds. Those are actually moving into and talking to agents that are looking for business context and applications. And then we're actually doing more of the vulnerability prioritization, the attack path modeling agents, the validation agents. We're handing that off to L1 and L2 SOC agents, and then actually moving into L3, where we have agents that will actually validate detections, build detections, run the hunts. We see those agents that we're building or integrating with, and it's very different now because now my agents talk to Wayne's agents, and it's no longer API integration anymore. But then I also see, like, as we talk to CISOs out there and what they're trying to solve, I think the majority of folks are trying to figure out what agents they can actually safely enable. And they're going back to basics around, and we were talking about this last night with a CISOs at a dinner. The business analysts are going to make a comeback. The folks that can document a process, and they use agents to do that, but they're going to move that back into kind of that security jobs to be done or the business process flow. That's what you're turning into, or you're making an agentic workflow. And I think also the BSOs that are going to be out there that understand where that security layer lays on top of that business process, and what controls, what patterns are required. So from an agent perspective, I'm seeing just about any security job that can be defined being an agent being created for, and then the augmentation or the enrichment across each of those jobs to be done to make it a little bit better or more contextualized. We're seeing that also being built.
Very interesting. And as you both know, we update AAC 1, the standard, every single quarter to try to keep up with the agentic capabilities. And one of the focus areas for this quarter was exactly like agent identity, access, and permissioning. Chris, if I shoot it back to you, say more about what you see as like emerging best practices when it comes to scoping agents and scoping their permission.
I would say, thank goodness for our cloud service providers because they've done a good job of pulling together, whether it's Vertex or any AWS or Azure. Like they're doing a really good job of trying to pull the identity wrapper into agentic. I think the operational challenge is what happens when you're multi-cloud, right? I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing right now is I can give identity to an agent, but what I can't still do is maintain the lineage and of the authorization given to that agent once it's actually spun up a new agent or called a tool and passed that identity off to that. So we talk human identity was one challenge, the tip of the iceberg. Non-human identity underneath it was the bigger part of the iceberg, and that's what sunk ships. Agentic is a polar ice cap in scale, and I think that's where the smarter people in the industry, the 1Passwords of the world, the security researchers, they're gonna, the startup folks, they're gonna come along and they're gonna figure out a unique way to maintain that authorization with the intent of the agent and then the actions that are spawned off those agents, because that's really where we fall down right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can only mirror that this comes up very often when we speak to CISOs in our consortium. And I can also say for myself that I've started reading the LinkedIn posts that come out from Wayne and Nancy at 1Password and their colleagues at Okta much more often, because you're really at the heart of this challenge, Wayne. But what do you see in the space right now? How do organizations deal with this?
Yeah, all great points. I mean, the old model where authenticating once at login and trusting for an entire session, that completely breaks for agents. And so, the control point, if you would, has to move to the moment of credentialing use. And that's where 1Password is focused. Chris brings up the notion of identity. We also think about compound identity, so that, an agent's identity is tied to a human identity, if you would, or other compound identity solutions. So for 1Password, the answer is really about runtime credential brokering. Agents don't receive a persistent credential. Credentials are issued, they're scoped to a specific task at the moment they're needed. So just in time, just for task is where we're focused. And the agents and their underlying LLMs never actually see the actual credential. It's injected via an end-to-end encrypted channel directly into the browser or into the tool's context. These credentials are not the long-lived credentials, and they're not provided to the agent as a session level credential. And so this is the path that we're taking. We announced at RSA last month a capability called Unified Access Pro, which introduced the notion of discovery of credentials on devices, the ability to then vault those credentials, and then from there to be able to broker credentials using short-lived tokens versus long-lived credentials. So between identity and credential brokering, we're approaching this as a just-in-time, just-for-task problem.
Yeah. And I'll say just in time comes up very often. We had a VP of risk at one of the 5 largest banks coming back to us as we launched the standard 2 weeks ago now to ask exactly how this is being implemented in the standard. And I think one of the challenges we always have is on one hand seeing the new best practices emerging and seeing where organizations actually are on this journey. So Wayne, if I can challenge you to share a bit more about where organizations are on this journey right now. Is it still early days and we're at a point right now where the gap between what we are doing and what we should be doing is quite wide, or do you see that organizations actually catching up appropriately to this new challenge?
It's a really important question. Where's the entry point? And if we look at the entry point at the CISO or at the CTO, it's somewhat challenging. If we see the entry point at the developer and at the team level, it becomes more tenable. In that, if we think about what we need to protect first, it really usually starts with what is on the devices or on the laptops or in the environments that developers create or teams create. The ability to capture their credentials, their secrets early on, and to be able to vend those into development environments, into CI/CD pipelines, and then into production in a consistent manner. Once an organization follows that path, the ability then to create agents, to develop agents, to develop software that uses agents, to be able to make sure that is secured throughout the entire CI/CD pipeline and is secured in production using one consistent framework, if you will, one consistent set of solutions, starts to solve the problem in a way which you have confidence in. And to the point of the standards that you all are creating, you can start looking at each of the 6 domains and say, how are we addressing every one of those names with the platform we're using to build and secure our agents? So this is how we're thinking about the problem holistically, and not in specific segments or against specific domains or criteria.
One thing you've both touched on already, but I think we should bring into the conversation is this question of just seeing the agents that the organization is deploying in the first place, dealing with shadow AI and uncovering it. About a month and a half ago now, we put out a white paper we titled "The End of Vibe Adoption." This era where enterprises spun up agents quickly, deployed them in sandboxes mostly. It was mostly internally facing, but then one click and actually they ended up having access to production databases and other things that they shouldn't have access to. And this approach of vibe adopting agents has to be over now. We're at a stage now where we see the cost of vibe adoption. We also start seeing the tools needed to actually govern this better. And in that paper, one of the big challenges we highlighted was this visibility challenge. So Chris, if I can start with you, how have you seen the shadow AI challenge come up when you speak to your CISO colleagues?
I think you touched on the right point there, and that is visibility. And I think that's where everybody right now is focused is, before we figure out anything, let's just figure out what people are actually doing here, where they're deploying them, what they're connecting them to. You look at Vercel. Vercel was an extension, right? Somebody authorized that they shouldn't have. And at the end of the day, that's kind of where I've seen a lot of folks focus is, okay, how do we understand what people are actually doing with agents? It is agentic as well, but then also, you're starting to see a lot of the detection and engineering folks were doing it. We just helped solve that at some of our customers. But at the same time, like, what happens if I'm running Gemma on my phone in airplane mode and then I come back onto the corporate LAN and I turn it back on, right? What happens if I've got a Mac Mini with 3 external cards on it and I unplug, the cable, but then I plug it back in or I connect to the Wi-Fi, right? Like, and this is all the things that we have the abilities to really go and detect and find. And I know there's some work like happening on the NDR side, trying to build patterns there for detecting. Same thing on the identity and the endpoint. But again, security's always had to do more with less. So now it's honestly building the agents to go out and actually go hunt the agents. I think Gartner called it the guardian agents now. Just please don't come up with another acronym, Gartner. That's all I can say. I think security really has to focus on being the guardians of the adoption, right? And I think the guardian agent is the right way to go, but security also has to be funded and skilled and staffed to be able to go and do that across the various telemetry options we have.
Yeah, and we can probably agree that it's not another abbreviation that will solve this. How does this come up with you when you speak to folks, and how top of mind is the shadow AI challenge right now? Is this the thing that keeps CISOs up at night, or are we starting to get our heads around the challenge?
This is top of mind. It's top of mind for all of us. Again, we are both solution providers and solution users. We are living the problem that CISOs and CTOs are living right now in how do you leverage this technology to create amazing value, but do so securely and safely. So, I mentioned earlier around a launch we had a couple, earlier around Unified Access Pro, which fundamentally one of the value propositions is discovery. We find that often it starts off as a credential product versus just a pure shadow agent product. We provide a capability which we use every day, which is the ability to discover shadow AI and just shadow credentials. Could be environment files, it could be credentials, could be API keys. You create a repository, you create an SSH key immediately with some of the capabilities we have launched to 100,000 enterprise customers already. Is the ability to see that you now have a key sitting on your system that you just created because you just created a repo and created a key for that, and it will vault that credential for you, and then inject that credential into your workflow without having to worry. That credential can be used by your entire team, so you don't have a team-level problem in production. I want to just also speak to something that we've done at 1Password, open source benchmark called Swarm that has found from every frontier AI model credential failures in real workloads. And we've run this at 1Password and continue to. And certain models are better than others, but we find that every model failed a very specific test, which was taking credentials and sticking them into a set of meeting notes that we forwarded off in an email.
Yeah.
The meeting notes were, hey, just summary of the meeting. and it just happened to have a few credentials in there, and it wasn't found by any of the frontier models. We're evaluating all of the tooling every day using such frameworks, and our own security professionals, as they run through frameworks that have created to find these issues, as well as the active elements that I talked about earlier.
And I think that's a perfect segue to the last question I wanted to ask, namely, what role you see standards like AUC1 placing. And the reason why I think it's a good segue is because one of the core requirements we've decided to build into the standard based on the demand from enterprises is quarterly red teaming of the agent. You can get very far with appropriate controls, but having a standard that requires that you go in and test that the controls actually work every quarter seems to be necessary, given we're dealing in probabilistic agents. Chris, you've been part of our consortium since the early days and shared your input for this standard. What role do you see AUC1 playing in the ecosystem?
A critical one, honestly. I think as we start to enable the enterprises to build and deploy these agents at scale based on enterprise architecture and enterprise security architecture patterns, they're going to, all of those architects and all of those governance folks are going to look back and say, what's the baseline? What does good look like? What does really good look like? What does great look like? Right. And where do we want to land based on our ability to have an acceptable risk matrix that allows us to still execute at the velocity that we need to go? And they're going to say, okay, like, we need that standard from the agent's perspective. Please make sure that you're building correctly. And it's going to go back into DevOps days, right? You want to go build an app. It's got to go make it through the pipeline. It's got to go out clean, right? And it's going to be the same thing in the agents. And I think that's going to be critical is we talk about it at CSA inside of the continuous work that we're trying to do there around control validation, continuous control validation, the CCAR. And it's going to be the same thing here. We have to have those standards in place. And I think AUC and all of the leadership and the colleagues that are putting their time in to build and define, it all has to kind of come together. And I see AIUC being critical in that effort.
Wayne, what's your perspective on the role of a standard like AUC1?
It's going to sound repetitive. I'm going to plus one Chris. Again, certain phrases I won't use, but I'll plus one as well. Listen, as a builder, we've used standards or frameworks such as AIUC in the past. I'll give you an example. I've built a lot of data protection capabilities in my past life, and using this frameworks, it's fundamental to have a conversation with customers. Customers are not going to understand every aspect of this new domain. So having a common language, having a common framework where you can have the conversation, and as that framework evolves, this is evolving quarterly. So we're all gaining new knowledge, new understanding every quarter. That's amazing. So I look at this framework as essential in having customer conversations. I find it essential as a builder to understand how to frame customer value and then how to communicate that value to customers. So, in the most recent quarter, your focus on MCP security and third-party risk and identity are fundamental to evolving everybody's understanding of where we are. And to Chris's point, at some point we will call agentic workflows. We will call agentic engineering. It's a wild west out there, but none of these ideas are novel and new, but they are coming at us at lightning speed, right? There's a 10x or 100x. You pick the right number somewhere in between there, in terms of how this is changing, because this is the first technology that's come from the top down. Most technologies, they come from the bottom up. They come from the technologists into the business. This one came from the world into the business. So we're all playing a little bit of catch up. And honestly, AIUC, is helping us do that with our customers and helping us do that at builders. So I'm a big fan. And
I'm sure the three of us could keep chatting for the rest of the day, but time is up. So let me just finish off by saying thank you to Jim Brevis and the rest of the Cloud Security Alliance for providing this fantastic platform to discuss these important topics at this important time. Wayne, Chris, thank you for joining me today in this conversation. And from AUC1, a big thank you to the 220 consortium members who provide their input on shaping the standard and making sure that it becomes truly like the industry standard. It's available transparently on our website, aiuc1.com. So for anyone who, like Wayne and Chris, are interested in using the requirements to go in and start defining in their organizations what good looks like, it's available free of charge to use. If you're interested in certifying your agents to get that third-party validation, including the quarterly red teaming, then we're very happy to chat. Otherwise, thank you, both of you, for fantastic.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you.